The woman he forgot to notice. There are moments in life when time holds its breath. When the universe leans in, folds its arms, and whispers, "Watch this." This is one of those moments. A whiskey glass, frozen mid-air. Dark eyes locked across a crowded ballroom. And a girl, no, a woman, who spent 9 years being invisible, finally refusing to be. What happens when the person who never saw you suddenly can't look away? What happens when the love you buried beneath years of silence claws its way back to the surface, at the worst possible moment? Stay with me. Because this story, it will rearrange something inside you. Her name is Gianna. 23 years old. Green eyes. A quiet kind of intelligence that most people in Lorenzo Moretti's world wouldn't recognize even if it introduced itself. She grew up in the Moretti estate after losing her parents at 14, raised not as family, but not quite as a stranger either. Somewhere in between. Somewhere no one ever quite had a name for. For years, she was the girl in the library. The one with her nose in a book while the rest of the world danced. Tonight, she is wearing a gown the color of deep emerald, a color that matches her eyes, and she has walked into the Moretti family's annual charity gala on the arm of Lorenzo's younger brother, Alessandro. Tonight, Gianna is done being invisible. Open book. Story begins. I know the exact moment Lorenzo Moretti sees me. He doesn't drop his whiskey glass. A man like Lorenzo Moretti never drops anything. Not a glass, not his composure, not his carefully constructed walls. But the glass stops. Mid-air. Suspended between intention and action, as though his body received a signal his mind hasn't processed yet. And from across a ballroom filled with the city's most dangerous men dressed in expensive suits, I feel the full, unguarded weight of his stare tracking me, every step, every breath, every deliberate sway of emerald silk. I refuse to acknowledge it. I refuse to give him the satisfaction. The dress cost more than my old car. I chose it with the precision of someone who has spent years invisible and knows exactly which details matter when you finally decide to be seen. Deep emerald. A neckline that suggests rather than reveals. A silhouette that says, "I have arrived, and I am no longer what you remember." Because I am not. The girl Lorenzo Moretti knew was 14 years old, red-eyed from crying in his family's library, grateful for whatever scraps of kindness someone might spare for the orphan daughter of a dead soldier. She wore oversized sweaters and apologized for taking up space. She followed Lorenzo around with the devoted, embarrassing loyalty of someone who confused proximity for belonging. That girl is gone. Alessandro's hand is warm and confident on my lower back as he guides me through the gilded entrance. He moves the way powerful men move, like the room was already expecting him. And I am hyper-aware of what it means to arrive on his arm. What it signals. What it will do to the one man in this room I spent years trying to stop loving. Alessandro had suggested it himself, that familiar wicked smile playing at the corner of his mouth when I mentioned the invitation. "Let me take you," he'd said, like it was nothing. Like it wasn't the most deliberately dangerous offer anyone had made me in years. I said yes. Because the alternative was arriving alone and looking like I was still pining after his older brother. I have my pride. What little of it survived 9 years in that house. "You're causing quite the stir, Bella." Alessandro leans close, his breath warm at my ear. I don't think I've ever seen my brother look quite so murderous while holding expensive liquor. I don't look. I refuse. Every nerve ending in my body is screaming at me to turn, to confirm what Alessandro is suggesting, but I press my shoulders back and keep my gaze forward. "Your brother doesn't care what I do or who I do it with," I say, keeping my voice light, polished. He made that perfectly clear 6 months ago when he set me up with his accountant like I was a charity case that needed help finding a date. The memory still stings. Lorenzo, with his careful, well-meaning expression, explaining how his financial advisor, mild-mannered, bookish, quiet, might be a good match for me. Because we were both intellectual. Because we both enjoyed reading. As if love were a compatibility test. As if I were a problem to be solved. "That was before you stopped being the girl he remembered," Alessandro says, his hand sliding a fraction lower on my back, a gesture that is entirely calculated and not remotely accidental, and became the woman currently making every man in this room forget what they came here for. Including me, for what it's worth. Alessandro. We talked about this. Did we? He smiles. I seem to remember you talking. I remember nodding. I don't remember agreeing. I open my mouth to respond. And then the air changes. There is no other way to describe it. A shift in atmospheric pressure. The particular electric tension of a presence that is not used to being ignored and is not interested in starting now. I don't need to turn my head. I already know. Lorenzo Moretti has crossed the entire ballroom. For me. Alessandro. Lorenzo's voice is careful. The kind of careful that takes years of practice. The voice of a man who has learned that showing too much feeling in a room full of predators is the same as bleeding in the water. Father needs to speak with you about the shipment issue. Apparently, it can't wait. I make myself look at him. I wish I hadn't. Lorenzo Moretti at 34 is not the same creature he was at 22. He is harder now. Leaner. The softness of youth stripped away by years of running an empire built on shadows and carefully kept secrets. His jaw is sharper. His dark eyes carry the particular weight of a man who has made decisions he will never fully forgive himself for. He is, objectively, devastating. And he is looking at me with an intensity that feels like being held. The shipment can wait, Alessandro says pleasantly. His hand doesn't move. I'm occupied. You're making a scene. Lorenzo's gaze hasn't left mine. He hasn't blinked. I'm not entirely certain he's breathing. And you're being deliberately provocative. Am I? Alessandro raises an eyebrow. Or are you simply unaccustomed to not being the most interesting person in Gianna's orbit? Something flickers in Lorenzo's expression. There and gone, so fast I almost convince myself I imagined it. I don't give myself the luxury of that lie. I'm wondering, I say, and my voice comes out steadier than I feel, if you're having trouble finding your own company tonight. Or if you've developed a sudden interest in charity cases. The words land exactly where I aimed them. Lorenzo's jaw tightens. A muscle feathers there, that small, involuntary betrayal of control. You were never a charity case, Gianna. No. Then what was I? I keep my eyes on his. Because from where I was standing, I looked a lot like a problem to be managed. Something to be handled carefully so it didn't embarrass the family. That's not. He stops. Resets. Reaches again for composure the way someone else might reach for a life raft. My attempts to help you were. Were what? I ask softly. Treating me like a little sister? Setting me up with men who were safe and forgettable because you decided on my behalf that something real was too complicated for the situation. Nearby guests have begun to pay attention. I see it in my peripheral vision, faces turning, conversations pausing, the subtle lean of the curious. Two Moretti men and the woman who grew up in their house, standing in a triangle of unspoken history at the center of the most watched charity gala of the year. Good, I think. Let them watch. This isn't the place for this conversation, Lorenzo says, low and tight. Then don't start conversations you're not prepared to finish. I step back from both of them. My heart is hammering but my hands are steady. Years of learning to perform calm in the middle of chaos, a skill I learned, fittingly, in this very house. Excuse me, I say, with the kind of composure that takes everything I have. I need some air. I move toward the terrace doors. I am almost through them when his hand catches my wrist. Not hard. Not restraining. Just present. The way Lorenzo has always been present. With a gravitational pull I have spent 9 years trying to escape. Gianna. Wait. I stop. I don't know why I stop. I should keep walking. I had planned to keep walking. I had rehearsed it, in fact, the clean, dignified exit, the closed door, the cool night air, the successful execution of the woman I had decided to be. But I stop. Why? I ask, without turning. So you can tell me more about how you were protecting me from yourself? How watching you with other women for years was somehow for my benefit? I turn then. And this close, this terrifyingly close, I can see everything he's trying not to show. The war behind his eyes. The fracture lines in the careful facade. I want to tell you, he says, and his voice is rough in a way I have never heard from Lorenzo Moretti, that watching you walk in here tonight with Alessandro made me want to do extremely violent things to my own brother. The admission hits me somewhere behind my sternum. And that terrifies me, he continues, more than I am willing to admit to anyone in this room. More than I've been willing to admit to myself for a very long time. I stare at him. 9 years. 9 years of interpreting every careful distance, every managed interaction, every strategic setup with forgettable men as evidence of his indifference. 9 years of constructing the story that made the most sense. He saw me as a sister. A responsibility. A remnant of a debt his family owed a dead man. You were never, he starts. Don't, I say. Gianna. Don't rewrite history in a ballroom to make yourself feel better about the present. My voice barely shakes. I count that as a victory. Wanting something from a distance doesn't mean you deserve it when you finally decide to reach for it. I pull my wrist free. I walk onto the terrace. The cool night air hits my skin like a hand pressed to a fever, and I grip the stone railing and breathe and try to remember who I was before I walked back into this house tonight. Behind me, through the glass, I can see Lorenzo standing exactly where I left him. Still watching. Always watching. And the memory comes uninvited, the way it always does, carried on the specific quality of autumn air and the particular ache of being 14 and crying in a library and hearing someone say, for the first time in 3 months, that you matter. Chapter 2, when she was just the awkward girl. I was 14 years old and crying in the library of the Moretti estate when Lorenzo first decided I was worth noticing. It had been 3 months since my parents died. A car accident on a rain-slicked highway, both of them gone before the ambulance arrived. My father had worked security for the Moretti organization for 11 years, loyal in the way men of that world had to be, with their lives if necessary. When he died in service of that loyalty, the organization honored its unspoken debt. The Morettis took me in. I was not family. But I was not nothing. I existed in the careful middle. Housed. Federation educated. Treated with the measured kindness of people who understood obligation without necessarily feeling warmth. I told myself that was enough. I told myself to be grateful. I became very good at being quiet, and small, and invisible. Until that afternoon when a boy from my high school told me I was too plain and too serious to ever be worth wanting, and I cracked open in the one place I believed was mine alone. Lorenzo had been 22. Home from university, already moving into the shape of the man his father needed him to become. Sharp and brilliant and surrounded by women who looked like they'd been assembled specifically to make ordinary girls feel like a mistake. He found me in the library looking for a business document. He found me instead. Hey! He sat across from me with the particular caution of someone encountering something unexpectedly fragile. Not touching. Just present. What happened? I tried to compose myself. I told him it was nothing. I told him I was being dramatic. If it made you cry, he said, it matters. 4 words. And something inside me, the part that had been performing gratitude and invisibility for 3 months while quietly falling to pieces, something inside me finally exhaled. I told him everything. Every careless, cutting word that boy had said. About being plain. About being too serious. About no one wanting someone who spent Friday nights alone with books. I watched Lorenzo's expression shift from concern to something harder. Something that had edges. He's an idiot, Lorenzo said. Simple. Certain. And someday, when you're older, and you know yourself better, you're going to meet someone who recognizes the difference between flash and substance. Someone who knows that the quiet ones are worth 10 of the loud ones. He leaned forward, meeting my eyes. You're not plain, Gianna. You're just not performing for the wrong audience yet. I was 14. I had been invisible for 3 months. And this man I barely knew, this man who moved through the world like he owned it and probably did, sat in a library and told me I was worth noticing. I think that was the moment I fell in love with Lorenzo Moretti. I think I have been falling ever since. 9 years of love. 9 years of silence. And one night that is changing everything. But what Gianna doesn't know yet, what she can't know yet, is that Lorenzo has been carrying a secret far heavier than wounded pride. A choice he made 8 years ago. A choice that shaped everything that came after. A choice she is about to find out about. The truth, the reckoning, and the beginning. Clapperboard, recap. She walked in looking like a revelation. He crossed a ballroom full of dangerous men to reach her. She told him wanting something from a distance doesn't mean you deserve it when you finally reach for it. And then she walked out onto the terrace, alone, carrying 9 years of unanswered questions. This is where it ends. Or where it begins. Both. Neither. Open book. The final chapter. I hear the terrace door open behind me. I don't turn. I already know it isn't Alessandro. Alessandro understands exits. Alessandro has always understood when to let a room breathe. It is Lorenzo. Of course it is Lorenzo. He stands beside me at the railing without speaking for a long moment. Below us, the city pulses and glitters, indifferent to whatever is happening up here on this terrace between two people who have been circling each other for nearly a decade without ever finding the courage to land. I need to tell you something, he says finally. Lorenzo. Please. The word is quiet. It costs him something, I can hear it. Lorenzo Moretti does not say please. Lorenzo Moretti does not ask. He decides, and the world rearranges itself accordingly. Except, apparently, right now. Except, apparently, with me. Just let me say this. I've been not saying it for 8 years and I'm not sure I can keep doing that and remain someone I respect. 8 years. I turn to look at him. In the low light from the ballroom behind us, Lorenzo looks like what he is, a man at the edge of something. Not the controlled, armored version that commands rooms and closes deals and keeps the entire city at a careful distance. Just a man. Tired, maybe. Afraid, possibly. More human than I have let myself believe in a very long time. When you were 16, he begins, and already something in his voice makes my breath go still. You wrote a letter. I stare at him. You left it in a book you returned to the library. I don't think you meant for anyone to find it. I don't think you even knew you'd left it there. He pauses. I found it. The world tilts slightly on its axis. I know exactly which letter he means. I wrote it at 16, foolish, exposed, aching, when I was still young enough to believe that putting something into words on paper might somehow drain it of its power. I had poured everything into those pages. Every feeling I was too careful to say aloud. Every impossible, inconvenient truth about what Lorenzo meant to me. I thought I'd destroyed it. I read it, he says. His voice is careful again, but different now, careful the way someone is careful with something they know is breakable. And then I spent 2 years figuring out what to do with knowing. Because you were 16, Gianna. And I was 24. And it would have been wrong. Regardless of anything I felt. Regardless of anything I felt. The words arrange themselves in the air between us. I look at them. I look at him. You chose the distance, I say slowly. On purpose. Deliberately. All of it, the careful management, the setups with safe men, the way you look through me instead of at me, that was deliberate. Yes. One word. Absolute. Undefended. Because you thought you were protecting me. Because I knew I was, he says. Because you deserved better than being in love with a man who runs an organization like mine. Because you were smart and kind and you had a whole life available to you outside of this world, and I had spent enough years watching people get consumed by it. He looks at me steadily. I thought if I made enough distance, you'd stop. That eventually you'd find someone who deserved what you were offering and you'd forget all about me. I did stop, I say. Eventually. I know. Something moves across his face. And I thought I'd feel relieved. I thought watching you move on would feel like a problem solved. He exhales. It felt like losing something I never had the right to claim. And that was worse. The city hums below us. Somewhere inside, the charity speeches have started. I can hear the faint sound of applause, the mechanical rhythms of a world that does not know or care what is happening out here. You still don't have the right to claim it, I say. I know. I am not the same girl who wrote that letter. I know that too. His voice is very quiet now. She was already extraordinary. You're something I don't have a word for yet. I look at him for a long time. I think about the girl who cried in the library. The one who learned to be grateful for borrowed kindness. The one who spent years in this house telling herself that wanting more was the same as being ungrateful. The one who eventually, painfully, deliberately, chose herself. Chose distance and independence and green silk dresses and the kind of entrance that makes whiskey glasses freeze mid-air. I think about everything I built by walking away from this. I'm not going to be someone you finally notice now that I'm leaving, I say. I'm not going to be a thing you want because you almost lost it. That's fair, Lorenzo says. It's also not what I'm asking for. Then what are you asking for? He is quiet for a moment. A beginning, he says finally. Not a reclamation. Not a correction of old mistakes. Just a beginning. If you're willing. Knowing what I am. Knowing what this world is. Knowing there's no version of this that isn't complicated and imperfect and possibly a disaster. I look at him. I think about all the reasons to say no. I think about the fact that I came here tonight in emerald silk to prove I was over him. I think about the way a frozen whiskey glass told me, before I even crossed the room, that some things resist the stories we tell ourselves to survive them. I'm not the girl who follows you, I say. I know. I will not be managed or handled or protected into invisibility. I wouldn't survive trying, he says. And the corner of his mouth moves, barely, just barely, in the way that has wrecked me since I was 14 years old. You've made that abundantly clear tonight. I breathe. The city breathes. Inside, the applause swells. A beginning, I say. A beginning, he agrees. And standing on that terrace, above a city that doesn't know our names, with 9 years of complicated history behind us and nothing but uncertainty ahead, I let myself, finally, begin. That's the end of Gianna and Lorenzo's story, or rather, the end of the beginning. Because that's what love really is, isn't it? Not the grand sweep of a ballroom entrance or the dramatic confession in front of a crowd. It's the moment on the terrace when two imperfect people choose the terrifying, honest, unguaranteed thing. It's the beginning. If this story moved something in you, if you recognized yourself in Gianna's quiet strength, or in Lorenzo's complicated, too late, better late than never love, then this channel is built for you. We tell stories like this every single week. Stories about people who love too quietly, too fiercely, too late, or just in time. Stories that remind you what it feels like to feel something real. So hit subscribe. Leave a comment and tell me, were you Team Gianna all along, or did Lorenzo's confession change your mind about him? Drop your thoughts below. And if you want more stories like this one, stories that stay with you, hit the notification bell. Because the next one, it's already written. And it will wreck you beautifully. Until then, thank you for staying. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being the kind of person who still believes in stories. Life lesson, what this story teaches us. Gianna's story is about more than a complicated love. It's about this. The version of yourself that you build after years of being overlooked is the most powerful version you will ever be. Not because it is hardened or closed off, but because it was forged by learning to love yourself without waiting for permission. We spend so much of our lives waiting to be chosen. Waiting to be seen. Waiting for the people who matter most to us to finally turn around and notice what was in front of them all along. But here is what Gianna learned, what all of us, eventually, must learn. You do not become worth loving by shrinking into invisibility. You do not earn belonging by being grateful for borrowed space. You become who you are by choosing yourself, by standing in the doorway of the place that once diminished you, wearing the dress that costs more than your old car, on your own terms, for your own reasons. And if love finds you there, real love, love that sees you clearly, love that chooses you honestly, love that comes not with possession but with a beginning, then you don't run from it. But you never, never, let it talk you out of the person you became in its absence. That person? She's the whole point.